So I'm a hunter, and I like to hunt wild boar specifically. For those of you who don't know, boars are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife make it legal to hunt them, with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, except boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year for the thermal vision scope that I've wanted, and it's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that cost twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. After mounting the scope to my rifle, I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck with easy to find spots that I could set up in a large clearing. The night started uneventfully, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbits, no owls, and the deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m. and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left, and taking some practice shots. Then, all of a sudden, I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in Predator movies. When I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little, I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't a bear. It was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed he was naked. No pants, no shoes, he didn't have anything on. I remember being disturbed by his movements. He kind of moved like a squirrel or something. He was twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Wait a minute, that was my tree. The one I'd been leaning against earlier. The sight of this terrified me. Could he actually smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted, placed his hands in the dirt between his feet, and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it. A voice coming from that direction. But the thing is, I can only see him. There was no one else around, and it was a very compelling female voice, crying for help, saying they were lost. There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Or was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? And then I heard it again. This time, they were saying they couldn't walk. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, but when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease, so good that I mistook him for a bear. I knew at this point that this could probably be a trap. This guy is trying to lure me to him with the damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit at that moment. I took my eyes off of him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position. but his face was staring in my direction. And I swear I saw a smile. The thermal scope has an effect that makes animals' eyes appear white. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. At this point, I screamed in his direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall he was. He was easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively set around, sailing above his head, into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't threatened me yet. So, what would I tell the cops if I actually shot him? I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. After the warning shot, he stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. I screamed at him again. He stayed on all fours, and this time, I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on the last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope. He was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck and I wanted to get out of there. At this point, I can hear him in the distance yelling this weird sound. It sounded like a woman crying. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck, breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. I never received an update. It wasn't until I told the story on a camping trip that my nephew told me about Wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot we were camping in was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard. I went on a hunting trip a few years ago by myself and my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in and around 20 miles out from a public road, or right where the tree line started thinning out. So when we got to the campsite, a big open meadow on top of a secondary mountain, it was about an hour from sunset. My big dog usually runs around within proximity of the camp as I put the tent up and make dinner. But I noticed this time was a little different. He kept staring up at the steep, tree-filled mountainside, his tail straight up and barking. Not the excited barks, but the unsure and concerned barks. Now, the day before, I had found a note left under a rock at the last landmark saying that there was a problem bear in the area that was harassing a party of campers just a few days ago. And I myself had seen big cat tracks the day before, so I was rightfully concerned that this may be more than just ground squirrels. I decided to go climb some of the boulders at the foot of the hill while I took my time looking up the hillside for movement before I went to go hang my bear bag up there. They were the only trees around to hang the bag. I didn't see or hear anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something up there. So while still concerned, I start hiking up this steep hill to hang the bag. It was so steep I had to use the trees to balance and lean against so I didn't go tumbling down, before making another 5 to 6 step push to the next tree I could lean against. Anyway, I'm slowly making it up this hill, hopping from tree to tree to keep my balance. Then I get about 100 feet up the hill, and I hear a whole lot of big movement, about 50 feet in front of me. My dog immediately goes from a deep, low growl to a savage, slobber flying everywhere type barking now. My heart starts pounding out of my chest and I start to panic. A million thoughts go racing through my head in a matter of seconds. Because if this is a bear, my dog is going to try and save me. and in the process will most likely die. And I'm stuck here. If I have to get off that hillside fast, I almost 100% am going to trip and fall off the 12 to 15 foot cliff onto the boulders below. So I'm feeling pretty screwed about now. Then I heard my other little dog start barking and freaking out down at the campsite, which was just out of sight. I had zipped her in my tent so she didn't wander off while I was away. So yeah, I'm panicking at this point. A few seconds later, after I kind of snap back into it, and I take another few seconds to start to put my survival priorities in order and call my dog back to me, he comes and sits against my feet, as my back is against a tree. So I'm kind of pinned here for a moment. But my dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there. So I let him lean against me while I tried to collect myself. This is when I realized I had completely forgotten that I had my headlamp on. I reach up so fast to turn my headlamp on. I punch myself in the face. I'm having some serious adrenaline dumps going right now, so much so that my knees are starting to shake. I get my lamp on and peer up the hillside. I figure I'll at least get a reflection off the eyes of whatever is up there. But nothing. I had just heard something. We both did. And whatever it was, it didn't get away or sound like it had made it too far. I knew something was there. So I'm just kind of steadfast at this point. I need to know what was up there, because I have to sleep here tonight. And I'm out in the middle of nowhere alone. Better to face it than wait like a sitting duck all night is my thought process. As I'm looking up the hill, and at one point my dog lunges forward, unpinning me from the tree. He does a fake bluff charge up the hill about 15 feet, and I mean he's snarling and foaming at the mouth at this point. As he does this, I finally see movement. Something is moving up and breaking the line of the horizon. My dog's bluff made whatever it was blow its cover. So now, I'm zeroed in. I call my dog back and silently watch, and what I make out makes my heart completely drop. There was a man, crouched about 75 feet directly in front of me, wearing not camo clothes but some raggedy shit with a hood that blended into the environment perfectly. It was almost like a makeshift gilded suit, but with his face exposed. I couldn't see his eyes, and his face was covered in dirt or something, but I knew we were staring right at each other at that moment. So I stare at him for what seems like minutes. No words. It felt like I was trying to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground. I wanted him to know I saw him, but I guess I was just too shaken to speak. As I'm staring at him, my little dog back at the campsite started to bark her head off again, like she was scared. I also had to get off that hill before total dark, or I could be seriously hurt. So carefully, I start heading back down the hill with my dog, who doesn't want to leave, but listens. Periodically, I would stop with my back against a tree holding me up, and look in that direction again, just to make it even more clear that I saw him. And eventually, I make it down to the boulders at the bottom. By the time I finally jumped down and hit the boulders, my little dog had stopped barking. I could only see the top of my tent from the bottom of the boulders. I thought she was barking just to bark, or just barking back at my dog. But when I got there, my little dog had somehow got out of the tent and was walking around the camp growling, with her tail sticking straight out. Still trying to hold it together, I thought, okay, maybe she just got her nose between the zippers and worked her way out, but I was positive I had zipped it so the zipper openings were at the very top of the tent door and out of her reach. So in the mixture of being terrified, pissed off, and the feeling of needing to do something, I reached into my bag and pulled out my .40. I fired a single shot into the air as the sun was setting, climbed into my tent without eating, and lay with my gun next to me until the first light. As soon as the sun came up, I packed up my shit and left, heading back down the mountain. It was all downhill back, but I still couldn't cover the ground to get back to my car in one day. It was dark by the time I made it to the last camp, about 4 miles from my vehicle. but thankfully, there were other people there. We sat around a fire they made, and I felt pretty relieved and safe. They started to tell me they were planning to head that way, where I was the night before in the morning, so I tell them my story in detail. Needless to say, we were both walking back to our cars in the morning. The thing that still creeps me out to this day, though, is when I got home and started reading reviews of the same hike I was on. Other people had similar experiences like mine as well. Even a man found dead from a fall around the same boulder range 2 years ago, and a woman found murdered last year. So to start, I'm a girl in her 20s from the rural Midwest. This past deer season, I had a very scary experience that I think you would like to hear about. So if you have ever done much hunting, you know that oftentimes you wake up early and head to the tree stand before the sun comes up. It's not bad waking up early because you're generally so stoked to go hunting you don't even feel that tired. On that morning, I went through my usual routine. Woke up around 4:30 a.m., showered with scent control wash and dried myself off. Put my clothes on, checked my rifle, loaded it, and was out the door. I had to hike a good way to get to the stand, and it's slow going because even though you can't shoot at the deer that early, you still don't want to spook them. So you have to be quiet and walk slowly. I get close, so I turn off my flashlight and start making it to the base of the stand. I thought I heard a branch or two crack, which was a good welcome sign. Also, this tree stand isn't like the metal frame one-seater. It's more of a tree house, a platform with 4 guardrails and camel canvas stapled to the rails, so I have room for a nice chair up there. It's still dark, so I lean back and start taking a short nap. I doze off fairly quickly, and I know I'll wake myself up in time for the early morning sun. It must have been about 15 minutes or so since I had dozed, when I heard rustling. It's still not shooting time yet, but early enough that I can see almost well enough, so I start looking around. I don't see anything, so I write it off as squirrels. That's when I heard a big thud coming from the base of my tree stand. I was looking out at the front at the time, so I spun around to the rear where my ladder is set. Like I said, it's still dark, but sure enough, there's a man who I can see on the ladder. I didn't know what to do besides yell "what the fuck" and raise my rifle. The guy just stood there, looking at me with wild eyes. His hair was unkempt and he smelled horrid. I tried to speak but couldn't. I was locked in a staring contest with this dude for probably 10 seconds with my rifle raised at his chest. At this point, he starts making weird noises that are really like a mumbling giggle. I've never heard a human make those sounds. I've always told myself, if I point a gun at someone, that's when they're going to die. I realize that if I feel the need to use such force to protect myself, the threat is dangerous enough to eliminate it. But with all those scenarios I've run in my head, it's always been something like being attacked at knife point or home invasions where I have my pistol. It felt incredibly odd to be pointing my rifle at a person who was just standing there. So finally I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I got no response. I got a little more aggressive and yelled that he was trespassing and this was my property and he had to leave. He took another step up. I warned him, one more and I would shoot. He just stood there. He picked up his foot